Welcome back to room 3 at Madrid platform. Before we break for lunch, we're going to talk about a subject which is of the highest importance and relevance, because we're in the middle of a pandemic and we're still looking for tools to achieve this new normality. And one of the key actors in this search for a solution is how companies can continue to work, and we need to manage the pandemic. We need to be able to work safely. And to talk about this in more depth and how companies are addressing the challenge of COVID and the coronavirus, we have Javier Gestión, who is the founding partner of Empresas, and we are having an interview here. It's a slight change in format, but we've respected social distance. So, Javier, if we could start this conversation, is that how can you have swapped from having an e-commerce platform to doing COVID testing, which is the main role of Empresas? So, we emerged in a difficult context, but we had technological knowledge already. And so on the 15th of March, 2020, when the world came to a halt, to all intents and purposes, as business people, we found ourselves in a very unusual situation. We were stuck at home, we couldn't do anything, and we were trying to think about what would allow us to go back to some degree of normality with all of the limits. And what we thought was that we had a technological business, and how could we use our tools and our knowledge to find a solution, or at least one of the solutions to the problem we were facing. And when you're stuck in your house and you previously were used to running around and doing lots of things, then you like to think to yourself, how can I help? And with a group of business leaders, we started an initial project which was donating respirators to public hospitals. This was through an organization of business leaders, SEO, and we had a crowdfunding. We organized a crowdfunding drive, and so we resolved this specific problem, which was the shortage of respirators. But then we decided to address another even more fundamental problem, which is how to detect the presence of the virus in individuals. And at the time, the few tests that were able to be provided were done by the authorities. And the PCR test for COVID is a very reliable test for detecting COVID. But under normal circumstances, you would do 10 a day under normal clinical circumstances. And here we found ourselves in a situation where the sector was not designed to handle this many tests, when we needed hundreds of thousands of tests done in a very short space of time. And so what I thought was, how can we make this a more agile process? How can we speed this up? And so I drew on a series of experts in this area. I spoke to them. For example, Fernando Simón, which is not the Fernando Simón that we all know here in Spain, but another Fernando Simón, who hasn't been able to be with us here today. And we looked at these clinical tests He's an expert in this. And we found ourselves in a sector which wasn't ready for this volume of demand, and we needed to help them to become more industrial in their approach to testing and move away from the more artisanal way of doing it that they'd been done until then. So we wanted to use new technology to do this, and we started to put the pieces together. So when we registered Democratest as a name in the internet, it was the 27th of March in 2020. And we already had an idea of what we wanted to do to democratize the access to testing, hence the name. And so when we formed the company, we had to wait till the 19th of May because the notaries here in Spain would not allow new companies to be registered in that 2-month period because of COVID. So it was a complicated situation, but we started to put the pieces together, and we created products which were designed to meet the demand that was emerging. And because we looked at the process, the stick goes up the nose, we send the results to the lab, we get the results. That's the process. But we had to create a huge team of people. Now, between the laboratories and the Democratest team, there's 120 people dealing with the work. And it's not just a commercial activity, it's also a technological platform. It's a complex analysis process from when the person books their test on the platform to when they receive their certificate. We have to share this data with the public authorities so that the health authorities have the figures. And so it's a complicated project. It has technological support. When you're dealing with thousands of people every day, you have to have super, extremely scrupulous, rigorous data processing. And everything has to be done extremely well so that there aren't any problems in the process. And especially because we have a responsibility to do this well and to emit a certificate which then is valid for travel and for other uses. It's a complex project. It's well structured technologically, but it was expensive as well, and the technology is very substantial. So from a laboratory that used to do 10 PCR tests a day, went to 2,000 to 3,000 a day, and therefore had to scale up their processes in a big way as well. A huge investment in technology, in adapting all of the processes. And it's been a very stimulating challenge. We work 26 hours a day at times. But we've done it. I think we're working well. The people that come to take tests with us have a very positive experience of the PCR test. And by making PCR tests more accessible, which it's very important because we need these tests. They're very important. When a test that this important costs 120 euros, we're down at 60. And it's already a start to the solution by making the test more affordable. That's the spirit of our company. Now, you've told me a bit about the background. You're entrepreneurs working in technology. I'm a journalist. And you saw this initial solution, which was to provide ventilators. And then you're trying to avoid contagion by doing the tests. Now, tell me, And I think we've all become sort of pseudo-experts in epidemiology. But what types of tests do you do at the Macroeto test? What's the price? Tell me everything. Well, there's 3 types of tests for COVID. The ones that are done in clinical laboratories, which is the PCR test, and which requires a technological and technical infrastructure that's quite substantial. Then there's the serological test, which detects the antibodies that develop if one has been exposed to the virus. And then there's the rapid tests, the lateral flow tests, and they also work, and they each meet a need. But lots of people say, no, I want to hug my parents and I need the antigen test. No, it's not the right test for that reason, because according to the latest studies on antigen tests, their reliability is only around 60% if you have symptoms, and around 60% as well when you don't have symptoms. So, to give a bit of context, if we're in a situation where where the data tells us that if 100 people travel, there'll be 1.5 people that are positive. If we do the same test but only antigen, then we know that at least 1 person in every 100 people in the airplane will get on that plane having COVID. And we need to be very careful. So, the reliable test, which detects almost all cases, no test is reliable to 100%, but we need a PCR test and then a second PCR test. So we test 3 different strains of the virus with our PCR test. And when someone comes out positive, they say, oh, is that I had an antigen test and I came out negative in my antigen test. Maybe the PCR test is incorrect. But if you have a negative antigen test, you should also do the PCR test to check it, not the other way around. So there's a lot of things that influence the situation, but there are reliable tests, which is the PCR test. There's a test which can be useful. For example, the antigen test. Here in Madrid, we use the antigen test and it's quite successful, but in other parts of the world, or even in Spain, the antigen test is not as reliable. You need to be careful with the tests that aren't as reliable as the PCR test. And then the blood tests, the antibody blood tests, all that tells you is what stage of the illness you are in. Do you have antibodies which will allow you to fight off the virus, or are you still fighting the virus and haven't yet developed the antibodies? And if we use just those tests, then we're going to miss a lot of people that actually are infected with the virus, because these tests aren't going to detect that you're infected, and they're going to give you a false sense of security, because in fact you do have the virus. In general,
en ocasiones obligados por una situación y que no escogen exactamente el que tienen que escoger.
This is when people choose to take these tests, or antibodies or antigen tests, are used in certain circumstances. But they're a lot cheaper. They're around 40 euros, whereas the PCR is 120, between 90 and 120 euros. And obviously, you're going to go for the cheaper solution if money is the issue. And so what we're trying to do with our policy on pricing is bring the price of the PCR down to the price as close as possible to the price of the antibody and antigen tests, because then they can be complementary to each other. You shouldn't do the other test without taking the PCR test as well. Because we say, well, there's 3 types of tests, and so what do? Choose the one that we like the best or that we fancy taking the most? But in fact, the PCR is the most expensive option. And I know people who have had 3 or 4 PCR tests, and they've spent a lot of money on these tests. And so it's wonderful that you're able to make them more acceptable and more available to people. And so, who are your clients? We're talking about companies, not just individuals. Yes. So, yes, obviously, we do a PCR test on an individual. The data that we hold is individual. And if we are doing this on the behalf of a company, then we have to ask for a data release consent form. But if people are to travel, if it's for work or to go and see family, they're one of our clients. There's also people that have been in contact with someone who is already positive, and they need to check whether or not they've been infected themselves. And then what we're seeing is that many companies are allocating substantial budgets for these tests. And so companies have called us in February, for example, saying, I've been given a quote for 100,000 euros for COVID tests. Is that how much you're going to charge? And I say, when we are looking at the scenario for COVID tests in companies, companies are very conscientious. They want to avoid any contagion and any risk of contagion in their employees. And we're finding ourselves in a situation with very different sectors. So what we're trying to do is try and resolve situations, help these companies, and do a series of tests on people in the company so that they can get back to some degree of normality. Because with working from home, this has resolved only some of the problem. Because people can work from home, but if you do a test and then you work from home, because you're positive, for example, then that's one solution. But there's other companies that need a really tailor-made solution. We can provide the results in 24 hours, which for a company that's got a production line that can't be halted, for example, this is very important. And this means that we have a specific type of test for companies. It's an urgent test, and the results are available the same day, but we had to alter our productive process, and this makes the process more expensive. But often companies want to take this solution despite the price because they don't want to have to stop their production lines. And I think that this is important. We have to try and adapt to the circumstances of each person or each situation. You need to know that you're free of infection. You don't necessarily need a certificate. Because if you're going to travel, for example, you get a certificate in Spanish or in English. Irrespective of whether it's for personal use, professional use, Obviously, if you need to travel, whether it's for business or for pleasure, you need a certificate. And it has to be done correctly, because there's a particular time frame before the flight within which the test has to be taken. And then there's companies that just want to get back to normal and know that their employees aren't affected. And so we adapt to each of these different scenarios to find solutions to them.
And speaking about returning to a new normal, to what degree do you think COVID tests contribute to returning to the new normal? Well, it's relevant. This virus shows us new things day after day. So we need to have a certain control over who is affected. We have strains from India, from California. So vaccines are not always valid. They need to be updated. So we're going to a future into where we're going to have to be vaccinated over and over. So like the flu. Indeed, very similar. So tests can help us return to the new normal. There's a sector that has been severely affected by COVID, which is tourism. They've lost a huge percentage of their business over the last year. And the tourism industry is trying to go back to normality. We're reaching agreements with hotels, for instance, with travel agencies, with a lot of different people and groups, in order to provide them with tools that will allow them to go back to normality. So if we want someone to come to Spain for tourism, German, a French citizen, I believe French people are the second nationality who's buying more tests from us, because they're coming here very often. Why is that so? Well, because it's an almost neighboring country or neighboring country, and we have so much in common with them, and they're very close. They come very often. If we want tourists to come here from abroad to spend here the holidays in the Balearic Islands, in the Canary Islands, well, it totally depends on us providing them safety, not only in the Spanish coast, but also at the time of these tourists are returning home. If we were talking about a family with 4 children who's traveling to the Balearic Islands, the prices a few days ago was 480 euros for people to be able to return to their country. So there's this sensibility towards being able to make this more sustainable. It's not the same for 180 than 200 euros, to give you just some figures. This does have an impact. In the specific case of the Balearic Islands, they have limited to 75 euros the cost of PCR. Some private companies were selling tests at 125 euros, and they've been told you cannot sell at this price. It has a sense. If we can sell a test at 60 euros, why are those being sold at over 100 euros? I don't know if people need to be aware or they need to show solidarity. This affects all of us. Each person that is not coming to Spain for their holidays amounts to a lot of money that is not coming into our country.
vamos a tener un déficit, digamos,
will be in
importante, y eso
deficit,
nos afecta, económicamente nos afecta.
and that affects all
Para
of
poder
us.
recuperar la normalidad hay
If
que
we want
tener,
to recover
hay
and
que ser conscientes
return to
de
the
las
new normal,
circunstancias, hay que ser
we have to
conscientes
be
de lo que
aware
se
of
gana y
what
de
the
lo que se pierde,
circumstances are, of what we're winning, what we're
tratar
losing,
de aportar
depending
un
on what
poco
we do,
el granito de arena de cada
and
uno,
try
¿no?
to
Nosotros, afortunadamente,
provide our support.
yo tengo que decir que hemos tenido la gran suerte
I must say that we've been immensely lucky
personas que han sido conscientes desde el
that
minuto
we
uno
were working together from the very first moment that they needed to make an effort in spite of what was the margin or how much money they were earning with the test. One of the first clinics that we work with, Europa Laboratory, this is still a member of our network of clinics. They said, let's see if we can compensate the lower margins with a higher volume, because demand is clearly going to increase, and let's see if we can move forward with this. That type of attitude is very relevant in many senses. We're not just talking about people who are going to come to Spain for travel. If we're talking here about Latin America as well, lots of the people to come for our test do so because they want to return to their homes to visit their families. So one of the things that we're questioning right now in Democrates, these people are going back home, and then they want to return to Spain. So they ask us, do you have Democrates in Peru, in Colombia, in Mexico? Realizing that we have people to whom we can provide a service here, but we can't provide them a service where they're traveling to.
Hay un germen, o hemos creado un germen de una cosa que puede ser interesante exportarlo, digamos, a otros países.
So we have created a seed of something that can be exported to other countries and grow there.
Como tú decías antes, yo creo tiene que ver más con un carácter preventivo.
These tests have a rather can function as a rather preventive measure.
Pero esto no solo además conviene aplicarlo al COVID.
This is not only appropriate for COVID, but for many other things. We can widen our portfolio of tests, maybe for STDs, for cancer. There are many tests that can be of a lower price. We can make them more accessible for a wider range of people. So low-cost tests, I think an interesting question. You've told me a few strokes about how the benefit margin that you have, of course, by increasing the volume, but something else that you have been able to do to reduce the cost of this test. Yes, of course. When we began doing this, we realized that the suppliers for reactive products, there was such a huge demand that they were out of stock. Price was very high, so we need to negotiate. We do our tests with an American corporation that is called Thermo Fisher, which is the largest company of this type and the one that has the most reliable tests. So when I started working with them, I told to the salesman, please show me a scenario of prices per volume. And he replied, I don't know if I can supply. Just give me your best price for a higher volume. So the cost of the reactive products went almost down to half of it, to half its original price. And I think we're going to be able to lower it even more.
posiblemente nos encontremos con que vamos a poder darle otra rebaja y hacerlos todavía más
I think we're going to be
accesibles.
able to
La
make them
cuestión
even
es,
more accessible.
que todos y cada uno de los actores de esta película,
Each and every one
han hecho un esfuerzo. Y cuando menciono las empresas es porque me parece importante que
of the
la
people
gente
involved
sepa
in this
que
has
esas
made
empresas
an
han hecho un
effort.
esfuerzo. Es decir,
The
han
companies
dicho, "Oye,
have made
aquí
an
hay que
effort.
arrimar el
That's why I
hombro
like to
este señor que tiene experiencia
talk about
tecnológica
them.
y tiene experiencia en captación,
So
digamos,
we need to work
o en
together.
prestar servicios
Someone who has
a unos precios
expertise
por debajo
at
de lo
providing
habitual,
services
ese
at a
ahorro de costes por
lower
la vía
price.
tecnológica, pues vamos
These
a apoyarle y
technological
vamos a
services.
creer en que eso es posible, ¿no?
So
Y bueno, pues afortunadamente
they decided
el 1
to
de septiembre
trust
fue cuando iniciamos
our
nuestra
project. September 1st, is when we started to do the first PCR analysis with companies that knew me and they had the need to do this.
220, 230 personas trabajando para hacer posible que, bueno, pues que
And we have over 100 people, or 200 people, that make this possible in the cities where we're already working and in the cities that we will be in the future,
pues puedan tener acceso a
so that a large percentage of the Spanish population will be able to have access to something that is going to be necessary. It's a problem when you have to pay 120 euros, but it's becoming less of a problem as prices go down. Well, we are now entering our round of questions. We have none that we have received in the platform. I don't know if people here in the public have any questions, otherwise I have a lot. Well, regarding your business organization, you haven't built clinics for Democrates. You have signed agreements with clinics. Yes, indeed. These clinics weren't used to this volume of work. They were used to doing this type of tests, but not in the conditions that we required. Especially being paid much less money for this test. I told them, we're not sending you one person, we're sending you over 100 people a day. In the end, they realized that this made sense, and they have adapted. Great. Well, because it has business sense to do this. We are not a non-profit. We are able to pay our salaries, we are getting benefits, but everyone needs to make an effort. Well, people sometimes say, oh, they're benefiting out of this. Well, of course, I also receive a salary. You need to receive benefits because you're also assuming a certain risk when doing this investment. People who judge are not aware of the economical reality of the situation. You mentioned other tests, and this raised my curiosity. Long term, we hope that the pandemic is going to go away, but these tests are going to still be necessary. Towards which other tests do you think you're talking? You mentioned me a few, but I've forgotten about it. Yes, I have several things to say. Regarding PCR tests, they will make sense as long as we can lower the price. They will still be a solution as long as we can lower the prices to 20, 40 euros, something that is accessible to everyone. On the other hand, what is happening right now in the health sector, everything is COVID. There are less surgeries happening. Everything is COVID related. So until we don't go back to the new normal, people are not going to be thinking about doing a genetic test, and that's an huge error because genetic tests can show what probabilities you have of suffering certain illnesses, or what could be your side effects when taking a certain medicine. You can have a genetic test that can tell you whether you can smoke or run, etc. Many people don't understand why certain illnesses affect certain groups more than others. So there are tests being done that can assess whether because of your genes, you can do better or worse with a certain illness. So that's what we're going to do. People need to be aware of what tests they need in each instance, and once we're back to a certain normalcy, we might need to do tests in order to prevent other diseases. Well, maybe insurance companies can be interested in this because, as we say in Spanish, it's better to prevent than to heal. Of course, if an insurance company has to pay treatment for a cancer patient, well, there's a lot of costs involved with it. So if you can do this test, you have some information that can help you out. Well, I'm a person of a certain age already, and I regularly do have analysis and testing done. I'm also like to practice sports, and I'm aware that it's very important to keep doing this test. If I think about what could happen to me if I'm not having this test, I want to do them. I've always wanted to do genetic testing, but I met a German doctor who had a test, and he had received this result that he had 100% probability of suffering diabetes type 2. So he started walking 10,000 steps a day, taking care of his nutrition. And of course, these types of tests can help us enjoy longer and more healthy life. Are we running out of time? Oh, we have a couple more minutes. Regarding genetic testing and what has to do with COVID, maybe this is a bit outside your area of expertise. In Spain, there was almost no genomic sequencing. And you were talking about genetic testing compared to Iceland, where there's a genomic sequencing of almost all of their population. Would you like to call out the authorities or the citizens to perform this testing? I'm going to reveal a little secret. The first agreement that we signed at Democrates was with a company that did genetic testing. We didn't roll them out because then COVID happened, but people should do it. The information they're going to give you is going to help you out. People shouldn't be afraid. If you know your probabilities, your attitude is going to be different, you're going to make different choices. It's something positive. Right now, we have genetic testing that we're going to try to promote, make it become an industrial process. If you do 10 tests, it's very expensive. But if you do 10,000, it's much less expensive. We want to disseminate this information. We want to explain which are the benefits for people to be aware that with this type of testing, you can live with less worries. Once you are over 40 years old, life is not the same anymore. If you can do a proper planning, that doesn't need to be very expensive. A genetic test for this type of things can cost around 100 or 200 euros. So if you have this, you have all of this information. You have already solved the issue of the lack of knowledge of how you are made up in the inside. If we lead a busy lifestyle, we have children, we work, we don't never have enough time to think about our health. And this test can reveal things about you that are singular, that can help you, that can help your doctor take better care of you. You may visit a doctor. They can prescribe you certain medicines and you happen to be allergic to those medicines. This test can tell you whether you are allergic to any of these prescriptions. Otherwise, you then have to go back to the doctor and so that they realize the side effects. This is going to give you more time and better solutions. Well, Javier, we're out of time. Thank you so much. All of this about preventive medicine and democratization of testing is exactly what we need to end with the pandemic. Thank you so much. See you all after lunch. Thank you.